I think the strategic reserve has got a lot of momentum in the Bitcoin community, and I wouldn't be surprised if it is a disappointment. I guess that might be a little bit of PTSD for, being in Bitcoin so long. It feels like it should happen, and it's the gradually part that grinds us all down and then disappoints us. So without wanting to be the bearer of bad news, a strategic Bitcoin reserve on day one, if it's not announced, which is probably my default that it won't be announced on day one, I don't think we'll have any significant change on the market. Where we are today on the 10th or 9th of January, where you are, 10th where we are, we're living in the future down here. If only that would translate to being able to manipulate the markets and buy low, sell high. I think it's not going to be a big deal because we've got sort of a bit of a pullback. We've had the talk of the 65,000 coins being sold by the Department of Justice, which is probably implicating the downtrend that we've got at the moment to circa 93,000. The big part here, though, is, I think, and this is where we don't want to lose the forest for the trees, the announcement of the strategic reserve, if it's not implemented on the first day, and technically it shouldn't be for the benefit of the US, it should be a slow burn where they're allowed to buy Bitcoin and absolutely dominate that purchase of Bitcoin from a government perspective in silence, under cover of darkness, so to speak, that they don't want to be signaling to the world what they're doing. The bigger part of this picture, I think, is that this is a signal to the world that the US, the global reserve currency, is going to have a strategic reserve in this. And most importantly, that is a shot across the bow for anyone else who has a currency that they need to do that too. And one thing that I haven't really heard talked a lot about at the moment, but I think this is of significant importance because no one's really talking about this, but the strategic Bitcoin reserve is going to be critical from a government perspective or a nation state perspective. But at the same time, there is also going to be a private Bitcoin strategic reserve. And this is where I think MicroStrategy is probably the most significant player in the space. It's effectively a Bitcoin strategic reserve for the private sector. And I think if we break down the implications of those two things, although we might have some disappointment on day one in the first few months of, no action on that strategic reserve, the implication to the rest of the world is that every country is going to need a strategic reserve in Bitcoin themselves. Anyone who holds foreign currency is going to have some form of denomination in Bitcoin. And then most importantly, I think, is going to be the fact that any country with a domestic stock market or stock exchange is going to have their own self-appointed MicroStrategy from a national perspective. It's all good and well to send money across to the US for, say, Japan, China, the EU to MicroStrategy, invest in that. What we're going to see, and Dylan Leclerc, absolute living legend he is, and what he's instituted with MetaPlanet in Japan is effectively, and I don't want to sort of dissuade anyone from thinking that Dylan is not absolutely brilliant, and he is. He's effectively taken the MicroStrategy playbook and applied that to a stock on the Japanese stock market. Now, I think there are multiple different stock exchanges across the globe. It is going to be of national import for every single stock exchange to have a self-anointed MicroStrategy, a national MicroStrategy that they can support and that can take pools of capital internally into that. And so I look at, not only are we going to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve, we're going to have a strategic public reserve or private reserve that's listed on the stock exchange. That's going to act like a MicroStrategy on a local level. And this is where the suddenly part could come a lot sooner than we think.
I've seen that gaining traction lately. People just talking about, I think it was when Saylor took a picture with Eric Trump or Donald Trump Jr., one of them the other day. And it was kind of making the rounds of, is Saylor the strategic Bitcoin reserve for America? What are your, and you kind of just alluded to that in a way where it's going to be important to have that public stockpile, but also some companies doing that in the background. Is that kind of what you're alluding to almost?
I think twofold. I think it's actually going to be, there's going to be a delineation of public money in the government sector having a strategic reserve, and then there's going to be private money in the form of Michael Saylor doing that. And this is where I think the headline was Bitcoin is on the menu, and he was at Mar-a-Lago with Eric Trump was the reference that had tongues wagging. And I look at that and think there's no conflict of interest with MicroStrategy and the US government supporting one another. And I look at this and think, and it's only conjecture, I haven't spoken to Saylor on this, and I just want to preface this by saying I think Saylor is our greatest Bitcoin advocate, and I have a huge amount of respect. I think he's our He's the best amongst us, along with one of my other favourites, Jeff Booth. He would have either implicit or explicit endorsement from the US government or the SEC to do what he's doing. So that tells you everything. The government is completely aware. They've effectively sanctioned his actions in doing that. And although the at-the-market offer where he basically issues stock on a daily basis to convert that cash into Bitcoin is a huge deal. The bigger deal about this, I think, because there's a far greater pool of capital around that is managed in a far more inefficient manner, is the convertible bond market. To me, that is an endless pool of capital that he can draw from, because that credit can be created out of thin air to pay that. And what he's doing when it comes to the US, I think is critically important. And my point being is that the US government will be happy to support Saylor doing that, I think, as long as the provision is in place that those Bitcoin are only custodied on US soil. I think they would have and take a very different approach to Saylor if he was custodying those Bitcoin in China.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Yeah, it is really wild when you see what's going on and you have Wall Street just grasping, trying to figure out what in the world is going on. It feels like insurance, bonds, they're on the clock. It just seems that way. The whole insurance market, the whole bond market, which is the insurance market and to a large degree, they're on the clock. Like they are the premium that's going to be eaten up by Bitcoin in the coming years, is it not?
Yeah. And this is where probably the canary in the coal mine for the insurance companies anyway, and the traditional finance space, when it comes to those convertible notes with MicroStrategy, was Allianz. In the latest tranche they sold, I think there was circa $2.5 billion of convertible notes sold, and Allianz accounted for over 20% of those. So Allianz in traditional finance is one of the most well-respected companies on earth, one of the best bond managers, and to have a company of that stature purchase 20% of a convertible note bond issuance for a company that buys Bitcoin is a huge deal. That is making waves across traditional finance. Allianz did what? In TradFi meetings, when I talk about Allianz doing that, everyone knows who Allianz is. The reputation that precedes it is enormous. A great custodian of money over many years, one of the best insurance companies in the world, and to have them invest in a speculative asset such as a convertible note and take 20% of the issuance, I think is an enormous tell for where this is going. And then that opens up the pool of capital and capital allocators in that space to then piggyback into the next round of convertible notes that get issued.
I would love your thought on where do you think the so-called price is? And again, I know it's hard, as Jeff Booth would say, it's hard to measure this system with how are you measuring Bitcoin with this random piece of paper over here that's then trying to measure the system? So I know it's a purchasing power thing at the end of the day, but where do you think that tipping point is?
If you want the answer to that question right there and you like that spicy clip, check it out here. Come on, we'll see you in there. But if you want the full interview in its entirety, all the spicy clips put together, and you're not going to want to miss it, believe me, then check that out here. Come on, we'll see you in there. Do it.